Most unsettling things people have ever experienced. Story 1. Let's see. When I was a kid, I was scared to go to sleep because there was a monster I would see come out from my bed or from the bathroom or the doorway or the closet. It was just a disembodied face that had its eyes closed. It was pale white. It would slowly make its way toward the edge of my bed. It got closer if I didn't look, which means I would stare at it for hours and hours. Once it felt like days. Eventually, I'd pass out only to wake myself panicking because I stopped looking at it. Therefore, it got closer, and every time it was slightly closer. I stopped seeing it when my sibling was born. Looking back, it was probably a hallucination caused by forcing myself to stay awake so long. When my other sibling was bedridden due to cancer, I was down the hall watching TV. I saw a shrouded figure cross the hall from my room into his. I slowly made my way to my sibling's room where he had a Family Guy on TV. He was asleep the day my grandfather died, a couple hours after he died, and I had yet to be informed of his passing. I was watching TV in the living room and saw him walking down the street away from the house. I called my mom over and she saw him too. Confused, we went to her front door, opened the door, and were planning to call out to him, but he was gone. Was on the PC and was playing some games. I saw a little kid run past me to my left. Initially, I thought it was my sibling, but then I realized this kid was younger with different colored hair, ponytails, and a couple other details. It wasn't my sibling at all. My sibling and I were in the kitchen and saw a shadow person get into cover on the outside of a kitchen window. My sibling screamed so hard. She saw it more clearly. I turned around and my sibling made a confused face. In my grandparents' house, she disembodied several times from the kitchen when I was alone in the house. At the old warehouse I used to work at, my coworkers and I would play hide and seek. We each chased after shadow people several times. Same warehouse, there was a fork that spawned every day in the corner of one of the empty offices. We were told to keep the place clean, so we would pick up trash on each shift. That fork was always there, even though we threw it away dozens of times. Same warehouse. As you appropriated in the mornings and the boss was to unlock it, you could hear a basketball bouncing just on the other side of the door. It would stop as soon as my boss turned the key to unlock the door. We were all confused the first time we got to the site, but eventually learned to ignore it. Same warehouse, there was a hallway where you sometimes see a figure standing at the end of it with your peripheral vision. No one who witnessed it had the nerve to look at it directly. We would just ignore it and continue our trajectory to the bathroom. Same warehouse. On the last day I was there, I was leaving and saw it at the corner of my figure, standing in the doorway to the bathroom behind me to the right. I continued my trajectory and left. It was my last day after all, and I had just clocked out. My friend's old apartment complex saw a shadow person walking toward me, and just as I focused my eyes on it, it got behind a pillar. I waited a while, but no one emerged from the pillar. I left. At an old apartment complex, I saw shadow people several times, mostly harmless. There was one that spawned behind me on the right. It was crouched down in the corner. I ignored it as best I could and left. This happened in the laundry room. As for more real things, living in MX, I heard some dudes get caught by the military outside my house, and I assume executed. Found some brass by the sidewalk next morning. Similarly, some dude was being chased and caught by a criminal at a small shop across my street. My mom and I were in the yard. The guy had the other guy at gunpoint. My mom yelled, "Don't do it." The guy with the gun looked around, saw there were a lot of witnesses, I guess, and ran off, helping my mom after school to clean up the school. She was part of a parents group that helped school. We heard laughter in the bathroom, like at least 5 kids. We'd go to the bathroom to tell the kids to go home. The bathroom was silent and empty as soon as we entered. There was once I was walking home at night. I was on edge because I had been awake for quite some time. There was a shortcut I usually take, not even that long, maybe a block-long trail through some trees. I heard chanting to my left and saw a doll in the middle of the trail. I called my sibling who picked up. I put the phone on speaker and talked while I went through. Looking back, I should have gone around, but it was such a short trail. I thought it would be fine. Unnecessarily dangerous, though. Should have gone around. I feel like OP is definitely a hub for paranormal activity, especially considering just how many experiences they've had. I will say some probably were just insomnia-induced hallucinations, but I don't know. The fact both them and their sister kept seeing stuff leads me to believe something may actually have been there. Story 2. Saw a legit UAP. This was in the later 90s. Worked late at this pizza place in California. Boss went out after we closed for a smoke and raced back and yelled for me to come outside. So I race out to see what he's freaking out about. And there's this big black triangle thing flying low over the parking lot. One bluish light on each tip. It's low, 200 feet up or so, and it's silent, like dead silent, moving at walking speed, almost drifting. The hair on my neck stood up. My dad was a Navy pilot, and I grew up going to air shows. I'd seen F-100, 17, V-2, etc. This was not that. Too big, dead silent. It drifts over, crosses the street and stops. We're looking at it from behind now, where the engine should be, but no glow, no noise. It hangs there for a minute. Then, with zero noise and no change in orientation, it shoots up to like 12,000 feet in the blink of an eye and goes to warp off the horizon faster than I've ever seen anything move in the sky, with nearly so much as a peak. About 70 people called into the paper the next day. It's one thing to read about stuff like this and think that's just someone mistaking a fighter or a balloon. Whatever this was, it didn't follow the laws of physics and moved like something from a sci-fi show. Spooky. For those of you who don't know, much like I didn't, UAP is another term for UFO. I know a lot of UFO sightings can be explained, but this one seems pretty real to me, especially considering how fast it shot up and left. Either that, or it's some super secret tech that the government doesn't want us to know about yet. Story 3. I had surgery and was discharged with some pretty serious pain meds. These oral morphine shooters. My sweet mother slept at the foot of my bed in case I needed anything. I woke up in the middle of the night with an unsettling feeling and looked over to the door. A moment later, a man slowly walked into the room, right up to my mom's feet where he stopped and just stared down at her. He was dressed like an old farmer and wasn't trying to sneak around or anything. Just stood there. I was frozen in fear, but somehow I knew he wasn't really a threat. Somehow, I knew he was already dead and was probably just lost and confused. But seeing a dead guy watching my mother sleep, well, it still gives me chills to think about. Eventually, I closed my eyes and just refused to open them. I already concluded that he wasn't there to hurt us, and frankly had no interest in knowing if he was still staring at her, or if he had come over to my bedside to stare at me. I kept my eyes closed for probably 30 minutes before finally getting up the courage to look, and he was gone. A few months later, I realized it might have had more to do with the morphine shooter I drank before bed than an actual ghostly operation wandering around our house. But it still stuck with me. I think I'll agree with OP here that it was most likely just the morphine compared to an actual ghost sighting. But hey, you never know. At least it wasn't a malicious ghost or anything, just a chill farmer. Story 4. Couple things come to mind. I nearly cut my finger off at work one morning. I was cutting only 1/4 aluminum pipe with a corded bandsaw that had rusty blades. I positioned my hand to grip the pipe with my thumb extended to steady the cut and make it clean. Well, the blade is rusty. I caught the pipe. The pipe rolled and the blade went in my index finger. I then had to wait a few hours for a med check or some equivalent to open, as it was a work-related incident, and that's the only place I could report for the incident. Once there, the doctor numbed my finger up so he could examine the wound. Being entirely stupid, I decided to look and immediately went white and woozy. He asked if I was okay and laid me down with my feet above my head, and I covered my face with my hat. After receiving 4 stitches, got back in the van with my boss, who proceeded to say ready to go back to work, and we ended up working a 10-hour day. Lol, usually work 12, so that was nice at least. It didn't happen to me, but still freaks me out. My sister went with a group of friends to a well-known rundown asylum in our state. They saw another group of friends that went into a sort of ground walkway, just wide enough for 2 people to walk shoulder to shoulder. The second group was always in front of them, and they just kept walking in that tunnel before they reached a dead end. They met or saw the second group, and there were no other passageways aside from the one they'd just come from. Pretty spooky. Story 5. When I was 14, I was staying over at my cousin's with a few of his friends for the weekend. We'd gone to the mall that night, and I bought a Ouija board so we could give it a try since it seemed like a cool thing to do with some friends. We were messing around with it for a bit, and at one point, one of the boys freaked out a bit and refused to touch the board again. He was convinced it moved on its own, and it wasn't us that moved it. Honestly, we thought it was just each other messing around, making the thing move to freak each other out. The rest of us messed around with it a bit more until we got tired of it. My cousin tried it by himself and seemed to get freaked out too. But honestly, I just thought it was their brain playing tricks on them. I had a small pet snake that I had recently gotten that was like 6 to 8 inches long, a baby California king snake with me that night that I had brought with me, wanting to show it off since it was small enough to live in a shoebox-sized container at the time. And of course, the thing got out of the box and got lost in my cousin's room. After this, it all happened. I decided to try to use the Ouija board and ask for help finding my snake. It was under my cousin's bed doing this for some reason. I don't know why. I was 14. Needless to say, I will never forget the feeling of my arms moving on their own to move the Ouija arrow forwards. Like, I knew it was my arms moving and not being pulled by the arrow, but it was without the sensation of muscles being used to cause the movement. Kind of like my arms going numb, but not losing any feeling at the same time. Freaked me out pretty big time. At this point, I knew what the other two boys had freaked out about. The next day, I managed to find my pet snake when I peeled the carpet slightly away from the baseboard and saw the white and black striped pattern of my snake under my cousin's bed, exactly where the Ouija board had moved towards when I'd asked for help finding him. Story 6. My dad hired this freak after abusing his prescription medication. Multiple caffeine pills, and chugging alcohol on top of them. Me, my fiance, and him were all splitting the rent in an apartment, and he got re-involved with alcohol. One night, he got so drunk he forgot he took his medication. So he took more and washed it down with alcohol, and more and washed it down with alcohol, and more, and then washed it down with alcohol. And then he found he was getting tired. So he took 10 pills out of a 24-pack of caffeine pills and washed it down with alcohol. He was so high, he was screaming in such genuine fear that it woke us up. So we went to the living room and he was losing his mind over the teenagers in masks on the balcony. They just climbed over the railing. They're glaring at me. Even though we lived on the 4th floor of a 6-story apartment building, unless these teenagers could scale a brick wall, there was no way they were getting up there. And B, the balcony was empty. My fiance convinced him to calm down and told the teenagers to leave, so my dad went to the bathroom. When he came back, he was wondering why we were up since it was just past 2 a.m. and we had work the next day. Apparently, he'd also had to drive my grandmother to the airport because she was just standing in the shower and asked him that. She died of cancer a good 6 years before this. We ended up calling the police and paramedics who checked him out. The cops lectured him on abusing drugs and mixing them with alcohol, then left, and the paramedics offered to take him to the hospital for some help because his heart rate was spiking and then slowing down at a concerning rate. But my dad didn't want to go to the hospital, so the paramedics told us we aren't allowed to force him to go if he doesn't want to go. So there's this amazing thing called a 302 in certain states in the US that allows for involuntary admission of someone who poses a threat to themselves or others. And I definitely feel like this guy might have needed one of those. Of course, I don't know what state OP lives in, but this is something I would suggest they look into to make sure that their father stays safe and also doesn't hurt anyone else. Story 7. I was a park ranger and was closing with another female that night. Closing duties consist of making sure that everyone is out of the park at a desk. Then you drive up to the gate and lock it so that no one else can drive in. We noticed before we drove through the park that night that there were no vehicles parked in the ranger station parking lot, which was right next to the main gate. We drove through the park, all cars were gone, so we drove back up to the gate to lock it. When we got up to the main gate again, we noticed there was now a lifted black Jeep parked in the parking lot. We looked at each other like, WTF? Where did this Jeep come from? Both of us were annoyed. We just wanted to go home. I parked the truck and we both approached the vehicle. As we got closer to the driver's side window, we could see the silhouette of someone sitting inside the car. It was really dark out by then, with only the streetlights across the wafer light. I knocked quietly on the window. Nothing. No movement. No one responded. I knocked again, this time louder. Nothing. The person didn't even move. Just sat there. Later, my coworker and I would both admit to getting goosebumps because of this at the exact same time. It sent chills through our bodies. Something felt wrong. We backed away from the Jeep and called our boss who lived on site. He showed up and we walked across the street to tell him what we'd experienced. By this time, there was still no movement from the person in the Jeep. As we told him the story, we all heard a noise like a car door opening. So we all turned around. We saw something sneak out the driver's side door. We saw the outline of a figure that creepily slouched to the ground, then crawled on all fours underneath the freaking Jeep. The way this person crawled under the car can only be compared to the way the little girl from The Ring crawled. Ew. Slow, jerky. It was straight out of a horror film. All of us were so freaked out. Now we had some creeps sitting under their car, probably working out a plan to kill and eat us, or God knows what. My boss called the cops, then called out to the person, asking them to come out from under the car. Silence. We could see their shadow sitting against a tire under the Jeep, not moving. Waiting for the cops felt like an eternity. They finally showed up and tried to coax this person out from under the car to no avail. The cop called for backup, and they legit ended up dragging the person out from under the Jeep because they wouldn't move or respond. It turned out to be a woman, and she was totally limp when they dragged her out from under a car. She put up no fight. As they led her to the police car, she was still silent, didn't say a single word or make any noise. She just looked right at us with wide eyes, not blinking, all the way to the police car. The police officer told us the next day that she was a known meth user, and that's why she was acting so weird. He also said that she was silent the entire ride in his car. She just stared with empty, terrified eyes. My coworker and I still talk about this experience all the time. I don't think anything has ever shaken me up like that did. No one could ever really be prepared to handle that. Don't become a park ranger, kids. Nature and animals are great. The people at parks, sometimes not so much. Story 8. Not nearly as distressing as some of the stories on here, but mine is with my brother. He has always hated me, making snide or insulting comments, ignoring me, but addressing everyone else in the room, and sometimes even putting his hands on me. Though this was uncommon, it was still scary. One day he basically shoulder checked on me in the kitchen for no reason. There was plenty of room for him to walk by. I finally had enough of his crap and demanded to know why he did it, and he just told me to stay out of his way. I didn't accept this answer, and told him that he was being rude and asked why he had a problem with me. We went back and forth for a short time until I asked why he kept hurting me. He got in my face, shoved me really hard, and yelled at me that he didn't give a freak about me. He towered over me, and it didn't hit me until that moment that my brother was bigger than me. He hated me, and he was dangerous, and that if he didn't give a freak about me, then there was nothing stopping him from hurting or killing me. It was extremely unsettling to realize that I was in danger, and there was nothing protected me. I wasn't safe. I quickly ran away and hid in my room for the remainder of the day, and I think I cried for several hours. By the way, for anyone thinking I'm overreacting like my mother does, my brother also has anger issues, isn't scared to get violent or fight, and has a history of hurting me, either emotionally or physically. I truly believe I was in danger that day and still feel unsafe around him anytime I have to be in his vicinity. To me, this feels like a time when the parents need to step in. At least for OP's safety. I mean, if this guy can be so aggressive with someone in his own family, who presumably didn't do anything to hurt him, it makes me very concerned of what he might do to someone else he's not related to who makes him mad. A scary thought for sure.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.